My darling Gemini, I see you. I see what you have been carrying, and I am going to begin tonight by telling you something that is true and that you will almost certainly not believe on the first hearing. You are being replayed. Not remembered, which is passive and which everyone does about everyone, replayed. There is a person, and something of yours is running in them, at intervals, without their consent and largely without their permission, and it has been running for considerably longer than you would guess. And here is the part that makes your sign so difficult to convince. You have no idea what it is. That is not a poetic flourish, my darling. It is the actual mechanism, and it is the whole subject of this reading. The thing that lodged in them is almost certainly something you have completely forgotten. You will spend the next hour trying to work out which of your grand moments has been living in somebody's head, and it is not one of your grand moments. It is a sentence you said in a car park. It is a remark you made while doing something else. It is a throwaway line that cost you nothing, that you did not think about again after Thursday, and that they have been carrying since. Stay with me, because I am going to do 4 things tonight. First, I am going to explain why your sign in particular gets replayed, which is structural and is not flattery, and which is the reason this reading is specific to Gemini and would be wrong for anybody else. Then I am going to tell you where in a person's day you actually appear. Not who, where. There are 5 specific moments in an ordinary day when somebody thinks of you, and they mean quite different things, and being able to tell them apart will tell you more about what this actually is than any amount of guessing about the person. Then I will show you the cards, and I will tell you 2 stories, one where it resolved and one where it did not, because I would not be honest with you if I only told you the first kind. And at the very end, I am going to tell you the single most useful thing I know about being thought of, which explains the mechanism I just described and which will, I think, land somewhere quite tender. I am putting it last deliberately, because you will not be able to hear it properly until you have heard everything else. And I want to warn you now that it is not going to tell you who. Nobody can tell you who, and anyone who claims to is selling you something, and your sign is far too intelligent to be sold to. It will tell you something better. I am Madame Aurora, 35 years studying the stars from my office in Manhattan, and let me be honest with you before we go further, because honesty is what your sign actually wants from anyone who claims to know the stars. You listen to the sentence underneath the sentence. You always have. So let me say what this reading is not. I am not going to give you a date. I am not going to tell you that within a certain number of weeks your phone will light up, because I do not know that, and because a date would cost you the weeks before it, and then cost you again when it passed. And I am not going to spend an hour describing a person and letting you fill in a name, which is the standard construction of readings like this one, and which I have never had much respect for. You will fill in a name anyway. Everybody does. But I am not going to build the hour around it, because the name is the least useful thing in this entire situation, and I intend to show you why. This reading is not tied to any month or year, either. Some of you found it 3 weeks after something ended. Some found it 9 years after, at an hour of the night when a thing you were certain you had put down turned out to still be in your hands. Now let me tell you why your sign gets replayed, because this is structural, and understanding it will change how you hear everything that follows. Your sign is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is not the planet of feeling, and it is not the planet of force. It is the planet of transmission, the thing passing between 2 points. Message, signal, exchange, translation, the moment when something in one mind arrives in another. That is your ruler. And it means that what you leave in people is not primarily a feeling, it is language. I want to be precise about this, because it is the difference between your sign and every other sign in the zodiac. When a Taurus leaves an impression on somebody, it is physical and atmospheric, a quality of steadiness that the person misses without being able to name. When a Leo leaves an impression, it is a light source. People remember what a room looked like in their presence. When a Scorpio leaves an impression, it is depth, an intensity of attention that other people do not offer. When you leave an impression, my darling, it is a sentence. Something you said, a phrase, a way of describing a thing that the person had never heard described that way before, and which permanently altered how they think about it. That is what lodges. That is what runs. And here is why this is so difficult for you to believe, and I want you to actually take this in rather than nodding at it. Words are cheap to you. Not in the moral sense. In the economic sense, you produce them constantly, effortlessly, in enormous quantity, all day, and you have done since you could speak. Something you generate that easily does not feel valuable, because value in your sign's internal accounting is attached to effort, and language costs you almost nothing. So, a Gemini says something genuinely remarkable at a bus stop in 9 seconds without preparing it, and forgets it within a week, and cannot understand why the other person's face changed. And that is why so many of you have concluded, privately, that you are unmemorable. That people enjoy you and then move on. That you are the entertaining one rather than the important one. My darling, that conclusion is not humility, and it is not accurate. It is what happens when a person cannot perceive the weight of the things she gives away most freely. There is a second structural fact, and it matters just as much. You do something to other people while you are talking to them. Your sign is the best in the zodiac at making another person articulate. Not at being articulate, though you are. At making the other person more articulate than they usually are. You ask the second question. You reach for the more precise word on their behalf and hand it to them. You laugh at the thing they were not sure was funny, which teaches them that it was. And what that produces, my darling, is a specific experience for the person on the other side of it. In conversation with you, people become more interesting than they are anywhere else in their lives. That is not a small thing to have given somebody, and it is the actual reason your sign gets replayed, and it is also the reason the replaying is so persistent, because it is not an ordinary pleasant memory. It is a memory of a version of themselves that they cannot access without you. There are also 2 rhythms worth knowing, because your ruler has a schedule, and it will keep running for the rest of your life whether you attend to it or not. Mercury turns retrograde 3 or 4 times every year, for roughly 3 weeks each time. Every sign feels it. Yours feels it structurally, because Mercury is not a visitor to your chart, it is the mechanism of it. And here is what I want to tell you about those weeks that is more useful than the usual account. They are when people reappear, not always in person. Sometimes as a dream, sometimes as a name arriving unbidden, sometimes as the strange sensation of being thought about. If this reading has found you during one of those windows, that is not mystical. It is that your ruler is moving backward, and the past becomes unusually accessible in both directions. And there is the 12-year rhythm of Jupiter passing through your 3rd house of voice and communication, which coincides, in nearly every Gemini life I have examined, with a period in which what you said years ago comes back to you in some form. Somebody quotes you to yourself. Something you wrote resurfaces. A person tells you what you once said to them. Now let me give you the part I most want you to have tonight, which is where you actually appear in somebody's day. I am not going to describe the person. I said I would not, and I meant it. But I can tell you the moments, because they are consistent, and because they are considerably more informative than any physical description could be. There are 5, and they mean different things. The first is the gap. Every person has unstructured time in their day. The commute, the shower, standing in a queue, the 4 minutes between arriving somewhere and the thing starting. Attention that has nothing assigned to it, and which therefore goes wherever it has been going. This is the most common moment, and it is also the least meaningful of the 5, and I want to be honest about that rather than inflating it. Everybody appears in everybody's gaps. Old colleagues, people from school, someone from a shop. The gap is simply where an unoccupied mind returns to whatever is unfinished, and unfinished covers a great deal. If you only appear in the gap, my darling, that is real, but it is not what you are hoping it is. The second is mid-conversation with somebody else. This one is much more specific. They are talking to a person, and the conversation is fine, and it is not going anywhere. And somewhere in the middle of it, they think of talking to you. This is the comparison moment, and it is uncomfortable to be on the other end of, and extremely potent. It happens because of the second mechanism I described. You made them more articulate, and a conversation in which they are less articulate reminds them, by contrast, of one in which they were more. My darling, if this is happening, it is happening frequently, because most conversations are unremarkable and yours were not. The third is the who would I tell reflex, and this is the strongest of the 5. Something happens to them, something small usually, and specific, and funny or strange or annoying in a very particular way. And before they have decided anything, an impulse fires. The impulse is to tell you. and then it does not go anywhere, because you are not available to be told, and so the impulse dissolves, and they carry on, and very often do not consciously register that it happened. I want to be clear about why this one is the strongest signal. It is not chosen. The gap can be lived in deliberately. Comparison can be indulged. But the who would I tell reflex is faster than any of that. It fires before decision, which means it is not a feeling they are entertaining. It is a structural fact about how their mind is organized, and it means you are still filed as the correct recipient for a category of experience. And here is what I most want you to know about it, which almost nobody says. That reflex is not necessarily romantic. It fires for old friends, for siblings who no longer speak, for a colleague you were funny with for 2 years. Do not let anyone, including yourself, insist that this signal means one thing. It means you are the right person to tell. That is enormous, and it is not automatically a love story. The fourth is when they are being witty and it lands. Somebody makes a remark, in a room, and it works, and there is a fractional half-second afterward in which they know where they learned to do that. Your sign transmits, my darling. That is your ruler's entire function. And people who spend time with a Gemini pick things up, phrases, timing, a particular angle of attention, and they go on using them for years, and every so often they catch themselves doing it. This one produces a very specific and rather painful sensation in the person, because it is gratitude with nowhere to go. And the fifth is the small hours. I will not spend long on this one, because it is the one everybody assumes and it is not the most informative. But it is real, and it is worth naming for a particular reason. What arrives at 2 in the morning is not the person's considered position. It is the unmanaged version, and the unmanaged version is honest, but it is not a plan. Somebody can think of you with real feeling at 2 in the morning and be entirely uninterested in changing anything about their life at 9. My darling, both of those are true at once, and holding both is most of the emotional work of this entire situation. Now, my darling, before I go on, I want you to do something with me, and it will take about 20 seconds. Think of somebody. Whoever arrived when I said the word replayed at the beginning. Do not second-guess it and do not talk yourself into a more sensible candidate, because your sign will do that within about 4 seconds, and the second name is nearly always worse than the first. Now go through the 5. The gap. Mid-conversation with someone else. The who would I tell reflex. The moment of being witty. The small hours. Which one do you think you occupy in their day? Do not decide from evidence, because you do not have any. Decide from instinct, and then notice which one you picked, because what you picked tells you a great deal about what you actually believe is happening, as opposed to what you have been hoping. Hold it. I will come back to it. Now let me show you what the cards are saying, my darling. I pulled 3 tonight. 1 for what lodged in them, 1 for why they have not acted, and 1 for what is actually available. The card I pulled for what lodged in them is the 8 of Pentacles. A craftsman at a bench, alone, working a coin with a small tool, and behind him on the wall are the ones he has already finished, hung in a row, identical. Most people read this as diligence, which is correct, and which is not why it appeared tonight. Look at what he is actually doing. The same object, again and again. He has completed several, and he is making another one, exactly like them. That is repetition, my darling. That is a person going over the same thing, at intervals, producing the same result, and going over it again. It is the most accurate card in the deck for a thought that will not resolve because it has already resolved, and is simply being repeated. And there is a second detail worth having. The craftsman is not doing this in front of anybody. There is no audience in that card. Whatever is being worked on privately, and the row on the wall is evidence that it has been going on for a long time, and nobody has seen it. The card I pulled for why they have not acted is the 7 of Swords. A figure walking away from a camp, carrying 5 swords awkwardly, glancing back over his shoulder, and 2 swords remain behind, standing upright in the ground. He did not take everything. That is the detail nobody mentions about this card. 5 in his arms, 2 left standing, and his head turned back toward them. That is the partial retreat, my darling. It is the card of somebody who withdrew, but did not withdraw entirely, who left something behind, deliberately or otherwise, and who has been looking back at it. And the awkwardness of the image matters too. He is not walking away cleanly. He is carrying more than he can hold comfortably, which is why the departure has taken so long and looked so strange from the outside. I want to say plainly that the Seven of Swords has a reputation for deception, and I am not reading it that way tonight, and here is why. In this position, the card is not describing dishonesty toward you. It is describing somebody being less than fully honest with themselves about the completeness of their own exit. And the third card, for what is actually available, is the Two of Wands paired with the Queen of Swords. The Two of Wands shows a figure on a high wall, holding a small globe in one hand, one staff fastened to the wall beside him, and the other held loosely. He is looking out at a landscape and a coastline, and he has not gone anywhere yet. It is the card of the decision at the threshold, not the journey, the moment before it, when the map has been consulted and the thing has not been done. And the Queen of Swords beside it is the clarity required to make that decision well. She is seated, upright, one hand raised in a gesture of address, the other holding a sword vertically. Of the four queens, she is the one who has been through something. Her clarity is not innocence. It is what is left after a person has been mistaken about something and has decided not to be mistaken in the same way twice. Together, my darling, they say something quite precise. There is a decision sitting at a threshold and it is not yours to make. And the quality you will need, whichever way it goes, is not hope and it is not patience. It is clear sight, of the specific kind that only exists on the other side of having been wrong once. Now, before I take you further, let me pause for a moment. If what I have said so far has landed, if one of the 5 moments made you go still, if the 8 of Pentacles and that row on the wall describes something you have suspected and had no language for, tap that little like button below this video. It is a small gesture and it does something quite real. It tells YouTube that this matters to actual people, and it carries it to another Gemini who has spent a considerable amount of time deciding she is unmemorable, which she is not, and which almost every Gemini I have ever met has believed at some point. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment. Subscribe and turn on the bell. I make these readings for every sign, and I make them so they can be found whenever somebody needs them, rather than only during a particular week. Now let me tell you about Iris. Iris was a Gemini client of mine, born in the last days of May, who came to me in her 40s about something she was slightly embarrassed to be asking about. 11 years earlier, she had worked with a man for about 2.5 years. Not a relationship. Nothing had happened, and to be accurate about it, nothing had nearly happened either. They had worked in adjacent teams, they had eaten lunch together perhaps twice a week for 2 years, and then he had moved to a different city for a job, and they had exchanged messages for a few months and then not. She said, "I do not think about him constantly. It is not that. But there is a specific thing that keeps happening, and I cannot make it stop, and I have never told anybody about it, because there is nothing to tell." I asked what the thing was. She said, "When something happens that would have made him laugh, I have already started composing it before I remember there is nowhere to send it." My darling Geminis, I want you to notice that she was describing the third moment, the who would I tell reflex, from the inside, and she had been experiencing it for 11 years about a man she had never so much as held hands with, and had concluded that this meant something was wrong with her. Nothing was wrong with her. I told her what I have been telling you tonight, that her sign forms its attachments through exchange, and that the exchange with this man had been of unusually high quality for a sustained period, and that 11 years is not an unreasonable half-life for that. I told her that the reflex firing does not mean she was in love with him, and does not mean she was not. It means the channel was good and the channel closed, and her mind has not been able to file it as closed because nothing ever formally closed it. And then I asked her a question that I am going to ask you later, so listen to it now. I asked her what she remembered him saying. She produced 3 things almost instantly. Not summaries, the actual sentences, with the wording. Something he had said about his father. A remark about a colleague that she said she still used. And a thing he had said to her once about her own work that she repeated to me and then had to stop for a moment. 11 years, my darling. Word for word. I said, "Iris, do you think he remembers saying any of those?" And she said, "No, of course not." And then she sat very still, and I watched her arrive at it herself, which is always better than being told. She wrote to him, not a long letter, which is important, and I will explain why later. 4 lines. She told me afterward that it took her 9 days to get it down to 4 lines and that every longer version had been better written and worse. He replied in 2 days. He was married, which she had assumed and which was in fact the case, and there was no second act to this story of the kind that people watching a video like this often want. But he told her something in that reply that she repeated to me and that I have thought about many times since. He said that a remark she had made in a stairwell, about how he talked about his own career, had changed how he made decisions for a decade. She had no memory of the stairwell. None. She could not place the conversation at all. That is the shape of it, my darling. That is what I am going to explain properly at the end. Now let me speak honestly about what all of this means and what it does not, because the phrase "somebody cannot stop thinking about you" is used a great deal and almost always vaguely, and vagueness is where people lose years. Here is what it does mean, and I will defend this part without qualification. You left language in somebody. That is real, and it is permanent, and it does not depend on their current feelings about you. Something you said is operating inside another person, shaping how they describe things, and it will go on doing that whether or not they ever contact you, and whether or not they consciously know where it came from. It also means that silence tells you far less than you have been assuming. People are extraordinarily capable of thinking about somebody daily and doing nothing about it for years, and there is no contradiction in that at all. And it means the asymmetry you are worried about is very likely not the asymmetry you think. Most Geminis in this position assume they are the one carrying more. In my experience, it is roughly even more often than people believe, and where it is uneven in unpredictable directions. Now here is what it does not mean. It does not mean they are coming back. Thinking and acting are separate systems, my darling, and the gap between them is where nearly all of the suffering in this area lives. A person can think of you at 4 of the 5 moments I described, for the rest of their life, and never once pick up a phone. The thinking is not a promise. It is not a preview. It is a fact about their interior, and an interior is not obliged to become an event. It does not mean the relationship was what you have since decided it was. And I want to say this one carefully, because it is the sharpest. In the years since contact ended, you have been running the thing in your mind, and your mind is the most linguistically capable instrument in the zodiac, and it has been improving the material, not lying, improving, sharpening the dialogue, tightening the structure, cutting the boring parts. My darling, you have been editing, and the version you are carrying now is better written than the thing that actually happened, and that is not a moral failing. It is what a Mercury-ruled mind does with unresolved material. And it does not mean you should wait. I want to be as direct about this as I am able. A person who is waiting is not living in a paused life. She is living in a life that is going by at the ordinary speed, spending it in a posture of readiness. That posture costs something every day, and it does not influence the other person's behavior by any amount whatsoever. Your waiting has no causal relationship to whether they reach out, none. It has a relationship only to you. Now let me tell you why they have not said anything. Because in the absence of a reason your mind has supplied one, and I have never once met a Gemini whose self-supplied reason was kind to her. I have heard the other side of this many times over 35 years, because people come to me from both directions. And the reasons that actually come up for people who have gone quiet on a Gemini are unusually specific to your sign. Indifference is on the list, and it is not near the top. The first is that they do not think they can match you. This one is enormous, and almost no Gemini guesses it. You are quick. You are funny at speed. You produce the right word without visible effort, and you have done it in front of this person many times. And for somebody who is not built that way, the prospect of writing to you is not neutral. It is the prospect of being read by the most linguistically capable person they know, while producing something slower and clumsier than what they remember receiving from you. My darling, people are intimidated by your sign in a way that your sign is genuinely unable to perceive, because from inside your own head, there is no effort being expended, and so there is nothing to be intimidated by. The second is that they assume they are one of many. Your sign has wide circles. You collect people, you keep loose ties in every direction, you are in contact with more human beings in an ordinary month than most signs manage in a year. And what that looks like from outside is a person with a great many close relationships, of which theirs is presumably one of 40. They are almost always wrong about that. Gemini circles are wide and thin, and the handful of genuine channels sit inside a very large field of acquaintance. And from the outside, the two are indistinguishable. The third is that they think you have forgotten. You move quickly. Your sign is adaptive. It changes context easily. It does not visibly pine. And it fills its life fast. And that is read, by people who do not understand your sign, as evidence of non-attachment. They watched you move on efficiently, and concluded that they had been correctly filed under past. The fourth is that there is no occasion. This one is particular to a certain kind of person, and it is infuriating. They will not make contact without a legitimate reason, and no reason has arisen, and so years pass, not because the feeling faded, but because the etiquette they hold themselves to has no provision for reaching out simply because you crossed their mind on a Wednesday. And the fifth is the one I want you to hold, because it will make more sense in about 20 minutes than it does now. They think the thing they are carrying is too small to mention. Whatever lodged in them is, in their own estimation, embarrassingly minor. A remark. A moment in a corridor. Something you said about their work in about 4 seconds. And the prospect of contacting somebody after several years to say, "You once said a thing to me and I have thought about it every month since," feels to most people like it would come out wrong, sound disproportionate, and expose them. So they say nothing. Not because it is small, because it is not small and they cannot work out how to say so without sounding strange. My darling, notice that 4 of those 5 are entirely compatible with somebody thinking of you constantly. Notice also that not one of them can be determined from the outside. All 5 silences look identical, which is exactly why interpreting a silence is such an unrewarding activity, and why your sign, which is superb at interpretation, should be extremely careful here. Now let me interrupt myself, because I know what a portion of you is thinking, and I would rather deal with it directly than let it run underneath everything else. You are thinking, Aurora, how do I know this is not simply me? How do I know I have not constructed the entire thing? Let me answer honestly rather than reassuringly, because reassurance will only make your sign more suspicious. Partly you have. That is not an accusation. Anybody who has spent a long time with an absence has generated material, and there is no version of this in which everything you are carrying arrived from another human being. If you wanted me to tell you that every intuition is a transmission, I am not going to, and you would not have believed me. But here is the part I will defend firmly, and it is the specific reason I built this reading around language rather than around feeling. Feelings are difficult to verify. Language is not. You can check this one. Right now, tonight. Can you produce something they said? Not a summary. The actual words. If you can produce 2 or 3 sentences, verbatim, from years ago, then an exchange of unusual quality took place, and that is not something you invented, because you cannot invent the specific wording of somebody else's speech and then forget that you invented it. That is the test, my darling, and it is a genuinely good one, and it works in both directions, which is the whole point and which I will explain shortly. Now let me tell you the other kind of story, because I have told you the one where it resolved. Colette was a Gemini client of mine who came to me some years ago, in her late 30s, in a situation that began with what looked like extremely good news. She had been told, secondhand, by a mutual friend, that a man she had been involved with 2 years earlier still asked about her. That was the whole of the information. He asks about you. She came to me about 6 weeks after receiving it, and I want to tell you what she had done in those 6 weeks, because it is the most Geminian failure I know, and I have seen versions of it dozens of times. She had written to him. That was fine, and I would not have advised against it. What she had written was 1,100 words. It was, she told me later, and I do not doubt it, extremely good, funny in 3 places, structurally elegant. It acknowledged the ending without relitigating it, referred back to 2 things from their shared history with real precision, and closed on a line she had worked on for 2 days. He replied with 4 sentences. And then, my darling, she did it again. Longer, because the 4 sentences had felt thin, and she read the thinness as reluctance, and responded by increasing the quality of what she was offering, which is what your sign does under uncertainty. You do not withdraw, you escalate the craft. Over 5 months she sent him perhaps a dozen messages, each of them better than the last, and his replies got shorter and further apart, and then stopped. She said to me, in my office, the sentence I have quoted to Gemini ever since. She said, I wrote him into silence. Now I want to be careful here, because there is a shallow reading of this in which the lesson is that she should have played it cool. And that is not what I think, and it is not what happened. Here is what happened. Every message she sent raised the standard of what a reply had to be. He was not a bad writer, and he was not indifferent. But by the fourth exchange, answering her required an hour and a level of performance he could not sustain, and the cost of replying badly felt higher than the cost of not replying at all. So he did the thing people do when the bar is too high. He did nothing, and then he felt guilty, and the guilt made the next reply even harder, and the whole thing closed. My darling, your sign has a gift that becomes a wall under exactly these conditions. You are so good with language that you can, without meaning to, make it impossible for somebody to speak to you. That is why Iris sent 4 lines, and that is why she spent 9 days getting it down to 4, and why every longer version was better written and worse. Pause with me for a moment, my darling. I know this has been a great deal. I want to tell you why I made this reading, and why I made it evergreen rather than tied to a passing alignment. Geminis write to me about this more than about almost anything else, and the letters arrive at strange hours, and they nearly always contain an apology near the top for bothering me with something so old. There is nothing old about it. A thing that is still running is not old, whatever its start date. If this is bringing you something real tonight, would you do me 3 small things? Like this video, it tells YouTube that this matters to real people, and it carries it to another Gemini who is at this moment composing something that would be considerably more effective at 1/3 of the length. Subscribe and turn on the bell if you have not, because I make these readings for every sign, and I intend to keep making them. And write to me in the comments. And I want something specific rather than something general, because general questions produce general answers. Do not give me their name. I know that is what is usually asked for in a reading like this one, and I am deliberately asking for something else, and I am asking for it now, before I explain why, because answers given before the reason is known are considerably more honest. Give me 1 sentence you remember them saying. The actual words. Not what it was about. What they said. 1 line, that is all. And if you have been here a while, membership on this channel means readings reach you before they are published. And it means you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first, and I answer there more often and more personally than I am able to anywhere else. Now let me give you the practical part, because I do not believe in leaving a person with an accurate description of her situation and no method. The first thing is the length rule, and it comes directly from Colette and from Iris, and it is the most useful single instruction in this reading. Whatever you are considering sending, send 1/3 of it. Not because brevity is virtuous, and not because you should conceal how much you have to say, because of what I described. Every additional sentence you send raises the bar for what a reply has to be, and a bar raised high enough produces silence from people who were entirely willing to speak to you at a lower one. 4 lines. Iris took 9 days to get there. The 9 days were not procrastination, they were the work, and the drafts she discarded were better written and worse. The second thing is a test for whether to send it at all, and I want to give you a real one rather than a prohibition, because prohibitions do not work, and I distrust readings that position the other person as a prize to be won through correct behavior. Send something you would be at peace with if there were no reply at all. That single test filters nearly everything. Most of what a person wants to send in this situation is a device engineered to produce a response, and you will feel the difference the moment you apply it. If you could send it, receive silence, and be genuinely unbothered, it is a message. If silence would be devastating, then what you have written is not a message, it is a bid, and bids that fail cost far more than they appear to. The third thing is to stop rereading. I know. My darling, I know exactly how many times you have gone back through the last exchange looking for the thing you missed, the tonal shift, the word that carried more than it appeared to. Here is why your sign in particular must stop. You are extraordinarily good at reading language. That skill is real, and it serves you enormously nearly everywhere else in your life. But applied to a small sample of text repeatedly, it does not produce insight. It produces new readings, indefinitely, because language genuinely supports many readings, and your mind genuinely generates them. You are not decoding. You are manufacturing. Every reread makes you less certain rather than more, which is precisely why the practice never satisfies and never stops. And the fourth thing is to talk to somebody about it badly. Once. To one person. In plain language, without making it entertaining. I want to spend a moment on that last clause because it is the one that matters most for your sign. When Geminis discuss painful things, you perform them. You will tell the story well. It will be funny in two places. You will have a good phrase for how absurd the whole situation is, and the person listening will laugh, and you will feel briefly better and then worse afterward without understanding why. The reason is that the performed version discharges nothing. It converts the situation into material, and material can be handled indefinitely without ever being felt. Say it badly, once, to one person, without the good phrase. That is worth more than 50 amusing accounts of it. Let me speak now to a few specific situations, because this sits differently depending on the shape of it. If it ended badly, if there was a rupture, if things were said, I want to tell you something about verbal imprint that may be difficult and is true. What lodges is not affected by how it ended. A person who hurt you is carrying your sentences. A person you hurt is carrying them too. Endings determine what happens next between two people. They have almost no effect on what was already deposited. If it never officially began. This is the almost relationship, the thing that had no name and therefore no ending. And for your sign, this is frequently the most persistent version of all, because it was made almost entirely of conversation, and conversation is exactly what does not resolve on its own. Iris's situation was this one. Nothing happened, for 2.5 years, extremely intensely. If they are with somebody else, then I will be direct, because your sign prefers it. The imprint is still real. The reflex may still fire in them, and the correct response to both, when a third person is involved, is to close it on your own rather than through them. Not for their sake. For yours. Because a Gemini who becomes somebody's secondary channel is a Gemini spending her best material on a conversation that cannot be conducted in daylight, and I have never seen that end anywhere good. If they are gone. Some of you are thinking of somebody who has died, or who is otherwise permanently unreachable. I want to speak to you gently. The imprint remains, entirely, because it never depended on contact in the first place. And the ritual I am about to give you was built with you in mind, as much as anybody. And you should not skip it on the grounds that there is nowhere to send anything. There does not need to be. And if you were the one who ended it, some of you were. The fact that you ended something does not disqualify you from missing it, and it does not make the reflex firing in you any less legitimate, and it does not mean you were wrong. You can have made the correct decision and still be running this. Now I want to name something difficult, my darling, because I have never given your sign comfort without honesty, and I am not going to begin tonight. You have already had this conversation. Not with them, alone, probably many times. Your sign does something no other sign does with anything like the same fluency, which is that you run both parts. You do not simply imagine saying something. You imagine saying it, and then you generate their reply, in their voice, accurately, because you know how they speak, and then you answer that. And by the time you have finished, you have conducted a full exchange, of high quality, in which everything was said properly and nothing was misunderstood. This is not madness, and it is not unusual. It is what a Mercury-ruled mind does with an unresolved exchange, and it is the same capacity that makes you good at negotiation, at writing dialogue, at anticipating what a difficult person is going to say before they say it. It is a genuine gift operating without a job. But it costs you two things, and I want you to know what they are. The first is that it discharges the urge. Having said the thing brilliantly in your head, a portion of the pressure to say it in reality is released. You have had the satisfaction of the exchange without the risk of it, and so the actual message never gets sent, not because you are afraid, but because some part of you has already filed the conversation as had. The second cost is stranger, and I have watched it damage more reconnections than anything else. When the real contact finally occurs, it feels like a repeat. You will be slightly flat. You will say less than you meant to, because you have said all of it already and the material feels used. And the other person, who is having this conversation for the first time, will register you as underwhelmed. My darling, I have seen genuine reconnections die in the first 10 minutes for exactly this reason, and neither party ever understood what happened. So here is what I would ask, and it is small. If you are going to make contact, do not rehearse it first. Not the good version, not any version. Write the 4 lines and send them within the hour. Your sign's first draft is better than almost anyone's third, and the rehearsal does not improve the message, it only spends it. Now, my darling, let me give you the ritual. It uses the only tool your sign has ever actually needed, and it runs in the opposite direction from what you are expecting, which is the whole point of it. Find somewhere you can write undisturbed for 20 minutes. Your desk is good. Your writing place is best, whatever that is for you. If you like a candle, light a yellow one for Mercury, and if you have none, my darling, it changes nothing, because the objects were never the mechanism for your sign. Sit down and take 7 breaths, longer on the exhale than the inhale. Now write down 3 things they said. Not 3 things about them. Not 3 memories. 3 sentences that came out of their mouth, as close to the actual wording as you can get. Take your time. Some of you will have all 3 in under a minute, which is itself information. Some of you will find only 1, and 1 is enough. Some of you will find you can produce 11 and will have to choose, and that is information too. When you have them, read them back. And then I want you to sit with a single question, and it is the question I asked Iris in my office, and it is the entire purpose of this exercise. Do you think they remember saying those? Almost certainly not. They were probably said in passing. They may have been said while doing something else. They cost the speaker almost nothing, and they have been in you for years. My darling, that is what it feels like from the inside. That is exactly what it feels like, and you have just produced the evidence yourself, in your own handwriting, about somebody else. And that is the whole of the ritual, because I do not need to complete the sentence for you. You have just done it. Now, if you wish, there is a second half, and it is optional, and you may do it tonight, or in a year, or never. Choose one of the 3. Send it to them. Not a message about it. The sentence itself, and 1 line saying, "You have never forgotten it." That is the 4-line message. That is what Iris sent, and it is the only kind of message I have ever seen work in this situation, and here is why. It asks nothing. It cannot be replied to badly. It does not raise a bar. And it hands somebody a piece of themselves that they lost track of years ago, which is the single most disarming thing one person can do to another. Whether they answer is not the point, and I would ask you not to make it the point. Apply the earlier test. If you could send it and hear nothing and be at peace, send it. But now, my darling Gemini, I want to give you the thing I told you at the very beginning that I was saving for the end. You have just written down 3 sentences somebody said to you, possibly years ago, word for word, and concluded that they almost certainly do not remember saying them. Turn it around. Somebody has 3 of yours. That is it. That is the whole of it, and I want to stay with it, rather than moving past it, because it is the answer to the question you have been carrying into this video, and it is a better answer than the one you came for. You have spent the last hour, and possibly the last several years, trying to work out whether you were significant to somebody, and you have been trying to determine it by examining your own memory of the significant moments. The conversations you know were remarkable. The night it was obvious. The thing you said that you were rather proud of. My darling, it is none of those. The thing that is running in them is something you do not have access to. It was probably not a moment you would have flagged. It was very likely said in a corridor, or a car, or a stairwell, or while looking for your keys. You produced it in 9 seconds, and it cost you nothing, and you forgot it by the following week, and it has been operating in another person ever since, shaping how they describe something, arriving unbidden when they are tired. And this is why your sign, of all the 12, is the worst possible judge of its own effect on people. Because you have been measuring your significance by what you remember giving. And what you actually gave, you gave away so easily that it never registered as a gift. The words were cheap to you. That is the entire misunderstanding, and a great many Geminis have built a quiet and lifelong belief around it, which is that they are the entertaining one rather than the important one, enjoyable and not missed. You are missed, my darling. Constantly, and by more people than you would believe, and in a currency you have never learned to count. And here is the practical part of it, because I do not want to leave you with a lovely feeling and no use for it. Stop trying to identify which memory is the one. You will not get it, and the search is what has been keeping this open. The specific thing lodged in them is not retrievable from your side, and no amount of going back through it will produce the answer. Do the other thing instead. Say another one. Not a grand statement. Not 1,100 words. Another light, unweighted, ordinary sentence of the kind you have been producing all your life without noticing, said to somebody who is currently in front of you. That is what you are for. That is what your sign does, and it costs you almost nothing, and it lands in people at a weight you will never be able to feel from where you are standing. My dear Gemini, before I let you go, 3 small things. 1. If any part of this reading found you tonight, if you produced 3 sentences faster than you expected, if you recognized the who would I tell reflex, or Colette's 1,100 words, tap that like button. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to another Gemini who has decided she is unmemorable and has been quietly certain of it for about 20 years. 2. Subscribe and turn on the bell. I make these readings for every sign, and I make them to be found whenever somebody needs them, which for this subject is very often at an hour when nobody else is awake. If you become a member, readings reach you before they are published, and you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first. 3. And this is the one I care about most. If you have not commented yet, give me the sentence. One thing they said, in their words, not their name. I read every single comment, truly, and I want to tell you why this comment section is going to be worth scrolling. It is going to be full of other people's sentences. Small ones. Things said in kitchens and car parks and stairwells by people who have no idea they said them. And every Gemini who reads it is going to understand, faster than I could explain it, what she has been leaving in people her entire life without once noticing. And if this reading gave you something and you ever want to say thank you more directly, a super thanks is never expected and always felt, and it is a genuine part of how I keep making these readings as carefully as I make them. If you know another Gemini who thinks she is forgettable, send this to her tonight. You may not realize how much a single share matters. It is how this work finds the person who needs it. Thank you, my darling. This community has become something I genuinely did not expect when I began. Somebody cannot stop thinking about you. I would not have built an hour around it if I did not believe it. But it is not the night you are remembering. It is not the conversation you have been replaying and improving for 3 years. It is 9 seconds in a corridor that you would not be able to place if somebody described it to you. You gave it away without noticing, my darling, because that is what your sign does with the only currency it has ever had in abundance. Somebody has 3 of yours. I am Madame Aurora from Manhattan, and I love you, my dear Gemini. I will see you in the next reading.